think it was about a month and a half ago. And he was talking a lot about his journey with entrepreneurship and kind of how he built his own like healthcare startup. And I'm sure you guys are familiar with the 2008 financial crisis. So he really built this company up for the past, for 10 years. And then in a span of a couple of weeks and a couple of months, everything was faltering because the whole entire world crumbled before his eyes, because we saw big banks like Lehman Brothers, we saw AIG on the verge of collapse, even other companies like General Motors. They were all collapsing before his eyes, and he had to learn about how to transform his way of thinking in order to create a successful startup. And that was like one of the most pivotal times to be an entrepreneur, because everyone was going out of business, but Michael Dermer was able to survive it. And that's why he's come to us today to kind of talk to us about what he's learned, and also, what values and insights he can offer as an entrepreneur. So, without further ado, Michael, can you just talk a little bit more about yourself and like where you started, even before entrepreneurship?
Thank you. Nice to meet everybody. Someone going around bribing you to pay attention. Thanks for taking the time today, guys. I'll give you a little background. So I grew up in Freehold Township, not too far from here. Not bitter rivals, but every once in a while crossed in sports and things like that. Went to Bucknell University on a baseball scholarship, went to Northwestern Law School. So I started as an M&A lawyer, doing complex M&A for a big New York law firm, but I really wanted to start a business. And when I was your guys' age, I was an out-of-work shortstop in the New York Yankees. Like, I didn't think about business, I was thinking about sports, right? Had a couple, baseball scholarships. I got drafted by Toronto Blue Jays out of high school. So I was thinking about sports, but once I got into my professional career, I really wanted to start a business. My parents and my family was entrepreneurial, but I didn't know what that business was. And in the early 2000s, after 3 years of law firm jobs, so basically Bucknell, Northwestern, do the math, lots of money for education. Quit after 3 years. Now, pretty normal to do. Back then, not so normal to do. And stumbled across and started the first company in the United States to reward people for being healthy. So we all have loyalty programs on your credit card and your airline. We started the first company that would reward people not for flying on a flight, but for getting a mammogram, going to the gym, not eating donuts, ... So left my law firm job, business planned, and bootstrapped it, put our own money into it, had my family invest some money. For the first 5 years, 1999 and 2004, really lean. Because think about what we're asking the healthcare industry to do. We're going to reward people that are not doing the things they should be doing themselves. Right? Kind of a foreign concept. So not only was it non-existent, it was almost offensive to go to a healthcare company and say, hey, there's this woman who's not following her prenatal care, but we're going to bribe her to do it because it saves all this money, right? Which it did. So concept makes sense, right? But very, very new and different. So lots of doors slammed in our face, built it up. From 2005 to 2008, after some 5 very lean years of building technology and doing all this stuff, we really started to grow. We took venture capital money during that time. So by 2008, we were about a $60 million company, 500 employees, off to the races. And as you said, literally that $60 million business got cut in half overnight by the financial crisis. When Lehman went down, Bear Stearns went down, and the world started to unravel, all of our clients were the biggest companies in America, right? So this healthcare technology software license business that we had basically built on our backs for 10 years was basically almost destroyed overnight. At the time, I had my family had invested a lot of money. I had venture capital and private equity investors, which investors are great when things are going good, not so great when things are going bad. I have a brother. Anybody here have brothers, right? Sisters, siblings, a year apart, grew up kicking the shit out and playing each other basketball every day. That's fine when you're playing hoops, not so good when shit goes bad. So anyway, I guess I shouldn't curse when you that's fine. Remember my audience. And so the next 2 years were literally, battling, scrapping, clawing to take this business that we had built, that we were literally talking about selling the company, going public, all these things, and we basically now had to save this baby that now had gotten destroyed. Somebody, if I was really being honest with myself about what was going on at that time, we probably had a 1 in 10 chance in survival. Because you go from a business that has $60 million in revenue to one that has $25 million in revenue overnight. So if they cut the school budget by 70% in a week, like this table wouldn't be here, right? That's what it was like. And at the time, if you remember the financial crisis, I know this is, you guys were probably kids at the time, right? It was almost like the floor wasn't there.
Yeah.
Like you'd walk down the street and it was like you didn't know the floor was there. That's what it was like. So we just battled. For 2 years, we worked, 20 hours a day. And fortunately, after about 2 years, when we started to stabilize and grow again, there was all this interest in healthcare in the United States. The financial crisis had kind of subsided a little bit, and healthcare had been ignored before the financial crisis, and during the financial crisis, nobody cared about healthcare. Just kind of have a job, then go to work, right? So it was completely ignored. So on the other end of that, a lot of people started to realize if we don't deal with this healthcare crisis, it is going to cost so much that it's going to cripple the economy. And we got approached by a bunch of investment bankers who said, we want to buy your company. And people come and say that to you all the time. And we're like, listen, we're just growing again, we don't want to buy it. And literally went into a bar, took out a napkin, scratched a number and said, unless it's this number, don't come talk to me, I got stuff to do. Because we had gone, like this, built it like this, and we were just coming up again. And it's that point, so you figure, and came back a week later with 3 bids, bid up the number another 10 or 20%, sold the company. And it worked out great. But it was wild, to say the least. I'm skipping all the gory details along the way. And so on the other end of that, as you heard, I was fortunate enough to sell a company, and literally I live in New York City now, and have for many years. I just literally wanted to try to give back and help entrepreneurs. Because for those of you who know, entrepreneurs is a very, very personal experience. Anybody been around entrepreneurism, family members, friends, thinking about doing it?
Yeah, I think a lot of our speakers that come around.
Right? It's like, no offense to the women in the room, it's like having a baby. Right? It literally is. And what really struck me was that while I grew up in Freehold, and even though there was this crisis, I was never going to worry about a roof over my head. But a lot of people sacrifice their savings, max out their credit cards, leave good jobs. Now, on the other end of it, right, you have freedom, you can realize your vision and your passion, and I was fortunate to sell a company, so the upsides are amazing, but there's a lot of risk to it, and I thought, is there some way that I can help and give back? But I don't know what that is yet. I've been working really hard for 5 years, I'm just gonna chill out a little bit. And I literally would just meet in New York City with people for fun, for 6 months. Just have coffee, you need help, what you're doing. And one of them said to me, being an entrepreneur is really lonely. And I was like, wow, that really captures the essence of what it is. So we started this company called The Lonely Entrepreneur. And so we wrote a book called The Lonely Entrepreneur. I should have brought you guys some copies. And then we built a online learning and community platform for entrepreneurs. So think of a one-stop shop to go and learn all the things that you need to learn as an entrepreneur, but in one place, right? So if your parents have money sitting around, they have nothing to do, go to lonelyentrepreneur.com and tell them to buy you a subscription to it. But more importantly, what's in there, right, is and some of the things that I learned along the way, which I will share with you, is that it's not about do you have passion and a good idea. I bet you if we asked everybody in the room who's in a club like this on a Friday afternoon, how many of you have passion about entrepreneurship, right? All of you, right? How many have a good idea? Well, you may have one now, you probably, everybody has passion and a good idea, right? That's what you need just to get on the ride, right? When I started in the early 2000s, it was enough. But what I really learned, so what our conclusion really was that it's not a matter if you have passion and a good idea, everybody has that. And with all the technology and the capital, both domestically and globally, right, we could have an idea in this room, somebody here knows WordPress, right? Put up a website, have social media in an hour, and somebody in Shanghai is doing the same thing, right? So what you realize, it's not about passion and a good idea, right? And a lot of times they say to entrepreneurs, just if you run into that wall more and harder than the next guy, you're good, right? But there's so much competition, that's not true anymore, right? What it really is how do you improve your specific skills as an entrepreneur? Like there's specific skills you're gonna learn, some of which I'm gonna share with you today, hopefully some of the more fundamental ones, that if you do those better, you have a better chance of success, right? If you do those worse, you have a lesser chance of success, right? Anybody here play sports? What do you play? right? You work at your craft, right? You're better when you go to the weight room, when you do your splits, right? When you do all your stuff, you improve at it. We didn't say that to entrepreneurs, right? We said, here, passion, good idea, here you go, figure it out, right, and be better at it. So what we haven't done is really said, okay, how do we actually organize these very specific skills that entrepreneurs need to be better at, okay? So before I kind of go through a couple of them, and I'm really anxious to actually spend most of the time listening, hearing your questions, stuff like that. How many people have parents or friends or loved ones that actually are entrepreneurs and run businesses? Okay. Anybody here doing their own business right now, starting their own business in some way? Okay. Cool. We'll talk about them more. So I want to hear more about what those are. Okay. So you're starting to experience what it's like, right, and what it actually takes. So I'm going to give you a couple. How long do we have, by the way?
We have until 3:15.
Until 3. Great. So I'm going to try to leave about a half hour for questions and stuff.
Yeah, sure.
All right. So a couple things that you have to think about. Remember, as entrepreneurs, we lack capital and we lack the resources that larger organizations have. Okay? Almost by definition, right? What we don't lack is the ability to think differently. Okay? If you think about, right, you guys may not even remember. Do people remember Blockbuster? You guys old enough to remember Blockbuster? Yeah. Right? Blockbuster does not exist. I mean, think about that, right? But Blockbuster should have created Netflix, right? I mean, think about it. They got in one meeting and gone, we have all the titles, we have all the movies, right? So the point is that big companies have resources and capital, but they don't have the ability to think differently. Entrepreneurs do, okay? And we have to employ those in the way that we bring whatever product or service we have to market, okay? Probably the most important lesson that I've learned as an entrepreneur is, we call it, you have to find a playground where nobody else is playing, okay? That doesn't just mean do it differently, because remember, the world is all cluttered. Like, you guys could take out your phones right now, and in there could be a check for $1 million, and you probably wouldn't even pay attention to it, okay? What we all fight is clutter, and we all fight the fact that all these large companies, and Google and Apple, and right, tomorrow can put $1 billion behind something and make it happen. So why is it that us in this room could come up with an idea that it could actually win, okay? You can't just find something that's a little different. You actually have to find a completely new playground where no one else is playing. So if you guys go out here and you go out to the football field, right, and you go there, right, and you're gonna say, okay, that's where everybody's playing football, right? But if you go down to the park, right, and you arrange a football game, right, and you say, I'm gonna give everybody $100 who shows up there, there'd be no football players there, right? You'd be at a place where nobody else was. And once you're there, you can define the rules, okay? Because it's your playground. You're not competing on somebody else's turf, right? So I'll give you a couple of examples. Think about my old company. When we started this healthcare reward companies, I'll ask you guys a question. You know the loyalty programs, credit card, like what was the average number of loyalty programs that an American was enrolled in the year 2000? Yes, across everything, airlines, hotels, banks.
Shadow number.
27. So tons and tons and tons of reward programs, right? All we did was apply it to a different playbook, apply it to healthcare. Same technology, basically, you do something, you get some points, you earn some rewards. All we did was apply it to a different playbook, okay? Starbucks, right? If you think about Starbucks is a really dumb idea. Think about it. So I live in New York City, right? You live in a pretty affluent place here in Bridgewater, right? There was, before Starbucks, there was coffee on every corner. In New York City, here, we live in, it's pretty good, right? Nobody was having a revolt in the streets that the coffee stunk in Bridgewater, right? And it costs, maybe here, $1.25, maybe in New York, $2. And this is what Starbucks said. They said, we're gonna put a Starbucks on every corner, we're gonna spend billions of dollars to do it, we're gonna charge $4, right? And oh, by the way, if it doesn't work, we're stuck with all this real estate, right? It's a really, really dumb idea. they did one thing differently, right? They made Starbucks the place that was a community for everybody. They said, come meet your friends here. Come hang out here. Don't even buy coffee. Remember, this is going back a bunch of years ago. And all of a sudden, people started having their business meetings there. People started hanging out there. And they used to make it, they used to welcome you, right? I don't know if you guys know this, but McDonald's back in the day used to actually make the chairs uncomfortable so people would leave quicker. Starbucks did the complete opposite. All they did was create a different criteria, a different playground. Where people going there going, yeah, I'll meet, where do you want to meet? Let's meet at Starbucks. I mean, who would have ever thought about doing that before, okay? The biggest skill you have to have as an entrepreneur in whatever business you're doing, you gotta find a spot, a niche, right? A playground where you're defining it, okay? And once you define it, you set pricing, you set the criteria for success, and hopefully, people will then find you, and people will then follow you, okay? Because you're creating a whole new thing. If you created a football team that only had 7 players, you'd be the only football team that had only 7 players, okay? What I'm describing is actually really hard to find. But remember, we all use social media, we all have access to money, we all have access to tools, right? Why does anybody win, right? Think about anybody, you're a track guy, right? You run, any other runners, like either, right? Any of you guys use Nike running shoes, right? Do you know most people think that Nike running shoes suck? That are much worse than Saucony's and Asics and all those, right? You realize that? Like all professional runners, they're like, nope. So why do people buy Nike? Just do it, right? Right? But the people that have actually tested the shoes and professional runners almost to a T say, no, I've never considered using Nike running shoes. Okay? They define the criteria, right, as we're going to use the cool shoes. Right? Even for something you guys know, functionally when you run, it's hugely important to have the right shoes and the right equipment. So even something where you're using the product every single day and you're using it in a way that can affect your performance, people buy the worst stuff just because of the way they position. Okay? How much more do they sell than ASICs? Billions more. Even though if you would ask 100 professional or semi-professional runners, 90 of them would say ASICs are better shoes. Okay? So you've got to find a criteria, a playground, a spot where you're defining. Right? And then you find that, and that's where you can win. Okay? Even with the same product or service as anybody else. Okay? Because you're just taking it to a place where those people aren't playing. And unfortunately, when we teach entrepreneurs, if somebody said, I want to start a public relations firm, what your friends and your colleagues and even your teacher will say, great, there's a trade show in Princeton for everybody who's in public relations. Right? Everybody in the state of New Jersey who's interested in public relations is going to go to this trade show on Saturday in Princeton. Go there. Why would you ever go to a place where every other one of your competitors are? And they're all going to have more money, and they're all going to have big stands, and they're all going to have cool marketing. Why would you ever go there? It would be better to go and stand up at the halftime of the football game and say, I do PR in Bridgewater. Right? You would be the only game in town. So just in your own mind, a lot of what will happen to you when you're young is you'll learn the basics. You'll learn business planning, you'll learn the basics of financial statements. People will talk to you about social media a lot, right? What you put out there, what gets reflected in the numbers, what you put out on social media, you can do all that, but if what you do isn't your own playground, what you will find is you're going to be competing on other people's criteria. Okay? So let me stop there. Does that kind of make sense to people? Okay? Part of the skill of being an entrepreneur is the ability to think differently. Right now, when we say rewarding people for being healthier, you go, for being healthy, you go, oh, of course. Right? But at the time, it didn't exist. Okay? Probably the most important skill, more than anything else I'm going to tell you, is that. Right? So when everybody's going this way, right, you want to go that way. Okay? Anybody baseball fans? Right? in Major League Baseball now, because of the analytics, they're actually considering not having starting pitchers anymore. Or they're just gonna literally have a guy who pitches 3 innings, a guy who pitches 3 innings, and a couple relievers, right? That's because, it's a bunch of reasons, but some of it's because you have these smaller market teams that can't afford pitchers. So they're just going about it a different way. You guys, everybody ever read Billy Ball? Right, or see the movie Billy Ball, which is about Billy Bean and the Oakland A's, where they had so much less money than anyone else, and yet they, right? All they did was say, how do we change the criteria? We're gonna get guys that get on base all the time, that play good defense, right? The point is, when you have less, which is always what entrepreneurs have in the beginning, right? Because there's money and competition from everywhere. You have to really use all of your creativity to try to find that playground. Okay, and it's really, really hard to find. Okay, makes sense? Any questions?
Yeah, so let's open it up to questions. Who wants to go first?
Okay.
How much do you originally invest in the company that you first?
So when we started, we put, I think it was a little less than $100,000. So some friends, family, put that in the beginning. To be honest, the biggest investment was leaving the law job. I was leaving like a pretty high paying law job after 3 years. So, but we put 100 in, and we needed to do a lot of things, but a lot of it was building technology. We had to build our technology. So.
How did your company pivot from like a mobile phone age where like rewarding people for like a healthy behavior, which might be like a lot easier with like cell phones, like back then, how would it really work, and how did you shift to like the modern era?
Making me feel so old. It wasn't that far back.
We still had Blackberries back then.
Yeah,
We did still, but no, a lot of that technology, even though it was very early mobile, it existed. You know, the internet was obviously prevalent.
of course.
Yeah.
It's like we'll be through a computer.
Yeah. So most of it was, but we had to deal with some of that stuff. People still do a lot of stuff through the phone.
No.
So we just had, whatever you did, if you went to the gym, right now you would just kind of check in with your phone and you get data. Back then you might have to, go to your computer and say you did it, or fax a piece of paper, and that just evolved over time. But it wasn't that far.
Nah.
Okay.
When I was scrolling through like the Lonely Entrepreneur, your newer company, I was also wondering, how would you market something like that? Because you're teaching so many people.
You mean Lonely Entrepreneur?
Yeah.
So for us, two things. One is the brand, right? You kind of get it, right? You say Lonely Entrepreneur, and you go, anybody who's been through it, you're like, yep, we kind of share the struggle, and hopefully we know what it's like to sit in the entrepreneur's shoes, because we've actually been there. Like, we all know we get advice from people that don't get it, right? And that doesn't really resonate, so that's a part of it. For us, it's like a framework, like almost like a curriculum, right? It's one of the biggest challenges we face, especially at like your guys' age, is you get thrown all this stuff, and you hear different things from different people, even in a structured educational environment. And you say, okay, well, how does all this stuff, you taught me a little business law, and you told me to set up a company, but how does it all fit together? So what we try to do is create basically a framework, and then around that framework, we have an online community. So people can go on there, just like we're doing face-to-face, people can go online and say, I have this question, I have this issue. People talk to each other, I made this mistake. And then we do weekly video coaching. So every week, anybody in the community can basically log on, go into the coaching session, and I have a consulting team that's basically on there doing that, answer questions. So we try to just give it some structure.
Has your background in law ever helped you in starting a business?
Sure. I mean, there's the legal normal mumbo jumbo that compared to the stuff that I was doing. The stuff that I was doing was, IBM buying AT&T, like big stuff at a really young age. So in my mid-20s, a lot of stuff, worked very hard, like crazy stuff. The stuff that ends up in the Wall Street Journal there's a lot of stuff that happens to make that happen. So the basics are really valuable, right? Starting companies, raising money, right? But for me, the biggest thing that helped me was negotiation, was learning how to negotiate, right? Because remember, when you're an entrepreneur, you have no leverage at all to negotiate. So my background of having to negotiate things at a young age, and Northwestern, where I went to law school, is very big into negotiation. They teach you a bunch of skills to be able to do it. So I would say that it's not even just law, but starting in there's a lot of people that come out of college, even high school these days, that start businesses. I think if you really believe you're an entrepreneur, like if it's kind of in your DNA or you feel like that's starting to happen, getting some kind of formal training, whether it's going to work for an accounting firm or consulting firm or even in any business of any size, can be super valuable because you need to know the context. You asked me about law, but you need to know the context of like financial statements and legal issues and stuff like this, so you can understand just what it feels like. It would almost be like I'm in this classroom learning this class, but does that mean that I can run a school? Right? Getting a broader exposure to law or to consulting or accounting or something like that can really kind of set a good foundation.
So a follow-up question on that, I was kind of wondering, what are some good negotiation tactics that you have?
So
Something that you learned in your professional life?
if you have dirt on somebody, that really helps. Most of the things that happen in politics is if somebody has dirt on somebody. What I learned, especially at Northwestern, was one lesson that was probably the most influential that I've ever had, and that is negotiation. A successful negotiation where you get what you want. Now, some people would argue a successful negotiation is when both sides get what they want, right? But a successful negotiation for you depends on your ability to have leverage, right? I have some kind of leverage, right? And if you don't have leverage, you need to create leverage, right? Now, sometimes negotiations work because we get along. Sometimes negotiations work because we want to be friends. But leverage is ultimately what drives people. So, for example, if I go to somebody and I say, I want you to make tables for me, right? And I say, I have 1,000 tables that I want to make. And that would be a big piece of business for somebody. And I go to them and they say, great, and they say, here's your price. That's one thing. If I go, I've got 1,000 tables, and I'm bidding this out to 4 suppliers. And whoever comes with the best price is going to be my supplier. Right? You're going to do better in the second because you have leverage. Okay? And you have to learn to create this genuinely, right? You have to learn to create this in everywhere you go. Right? My company's doing work with a company that does vegan chili. And they go to Whole Foods, and Whole Foods says, we want you to be here only, we only want you to be in Whole Foods. Now right now, Whole Foods is a huge source of their business. They have no leverage whatsoever, right? And so I'm like, we need leverage. Because when we want to tell Whole Foods that they got to pay more for it, they're going to say, we're Whole Foods. We have no leverage, right? So we went out and we created relationships with 3 other major supermarkets, right? And we said, we're going to let one supermarket be our exclusive if you get to this price. But we wouldn't be able to do that unless we created